Well, good morning. Thank you for coming today. My name is State Representative Tom Demmer from Dixon. I'm joined by my colleagues, Representative Tony McCombie from Savannah, Representative Joe Sosnowski from Rockford, and Representative Jeff Keicher from Sycamore. We're here today to talk about one of the most pressing issues facing Illinois taxpayers, and that's Illinois' current level of property taxation. For years, we've been talking about how Illinois really is an outlier in having some of the highest property taxes in the country. And we've long talked about the importance of having a legislative package that would help bring down some of those costs. This has been, at least in name, talked about by both parties, by both Republicans and Democrats, the importance of having property tax relief. Unfortunately, over the last several years, those efforts have been a lot more talk than action. In fact, one of the most recent steps that was taken was the establishment of Senate Bill 1932, which established a property tax relief task force that ended up ballooning into an 88-member task force that had input from some members of some parties, but certainly not from all members, and not taking into account many of the suggestions that we in the House Republican Caucus suggested. The task force was just another example of a blue ribbon commission that talked a lot and put forward a report that does very little to address the underlying causes of Illinois having some of the highest property taxes in the country. It spent more time talking about how we could shift payment from one pocket to another rather than talking about real concrete ways we could reduce the cost of government and provide real relief to taxpayers. Why did we put together this task force if we've been talking for several years? Well, it was intricately tied with the vote that the Illinois House of Representatives took regarding the graduated income tax increase proposal that'll be on the ballot for voters this fall. As a part of winning Democratic support for that income tax increase, some members of the Democratic Party suggested that we put together a task force on property tax relief, that those two votes were tied together. And so yet again from Springfield, what we saw was talk about maybe considering sometime down the line some kind of property tax relief and a binding way to increase income taxes on the other hand. That's not a very good deal for taxpayers. And we at the time talked about how we didn't need more talk on property tax relief. We needed to see some real action, some real ways to reduce those costs. Unfortunately, as you might imagine, this 88-member task force did not come up with very productive recommendations. And the Democratic-led task force ignored many of the recommendations that the House Republican Caucus made. It's incredibly important that we address, from a cause perspective, we address the reason that property taxes are so high, so we can actually reduce the cost and not just shift the burden from property taxes to income taxes or property taxes to sales taxes, but actually have some ways that we can achieve meaningful property tax relief. One of the members of the task force was State Representative Joe Sosnowski from Rockford, and he's going to tell you a little bit about some of the recommendations that were made and how those real meaningful recommendations by the House Republican Caucus were ignored by Democratic leadership, and the property tax task force ended up coming with a one-sided report that does little to actually move the needle on property taxes. Representative?
Thanks, Representative Demmer. Good morning, State Representative Joe Sosnowski. As you know, my district represents most of Boone County and the eastern part of Winnebago. As one of the Republican co-chairs on the Property Tax Relief Task Force, we truly hope that this would be a great opportunity to put together a commission, a bipartisan commission that would truly look at property tax reform and, as Representative Demmer mentioned, focus on what the driving costs are in Illinois so that we can find ways to reduce property taxes and reduce them by lowering the cost of government, not just at the state level, but at the local level, as well as providing relief and opportunities at the local level for individual local taxing districts to be able to find ways to reduce that. Because the Democrats who controlled the property tax task force, they missed their deadline of October 31st for a draft report, as we know. They also missed the deadline of December 31st. This is despite us making several inquiries, hoping to move them along and to have greater involvement in the process. What we have seen to date in the draft document is really a collection, a meandering collection of thoughts and ideas, none of which that have been properly vetted and discussed at the full committee level. Basically, the process was a bunch of subcommittees met on kind of an ad hoc basis, grabbed a bunch of ideas, put them into a rough draft document without vetting those ideas or without going into detail or discussing those or voting on them. They put them into a large working draft, and then that's where we're at right now. There has not been an additional meeting of the full committee. The Democratic leadership has not asked for an additional discussion or debate. There's been no votes on any of the ideas that have been forwarded from the subcommittees. Instead of bringing us closer together, really this process has not produced any meaningful or lasting property relief suggestions for families of Illinois and our region in particular. And the task force really has become a complete disaster. As was mentioned by Representative Demmer, it started out with 88 members, which, as you could imagine, makes it a very large, unruly, and unworkable process to begin with. Despite that, we were still hopeful that we would continue to work on a bipartisan basis, but as to date, that has not happened. House Republicans also brought forth a lot of ideas for property tax relief that were summarily dismissed. We submitted many of those, over 26 different ideas at the subcommittee level. Many of those were eliminated from the final draft, even though, again, that final draft was a collection of ideas. Just a few of them include things like addressing the conflict of interest in the property tax system. We can go into more detail on that later, but essentially when you have appeals and attorneys and all these different moving parts, in addition to particular elected officials that are tied up in the property tax appeal system, we thought that conflict of interest was extremely important to discuss in order to find ways to, again, make the system more transparent for taxpayers. Additionally, items like pension reform in order to reduce costs, both at the state and local level, were not allowed or discussed. Greater reforms for local government, including mandate relief for schools, local governments, cities, counties, et cetera, was summarily dismissed. Enhanced transparency on property tax bills, including informing taxpayers of the costs of litigation, workers' comp, insurance, et cetera, were all ideas that we were submitted, and they were summarily dismissed and not included in the final draft. We also suggested opportunities for expanding tax relief for seniors, including possible exemptions from school district levies or portions of that, or expanded assessment freezes. Again, these ideas were dismissed. In addition to consolidation, which parts of that are in that draft, but we suggested a vehicle for school district sharing of resources, also in addition to consolidation. Again, to create more ways to reduce duplication at the local level so that we can pass on savings to taxpayers. We have a huge issue here. Everyone knows, it's been reported generally, that we're the second highest property taxes in the nation. And again, we were hopeful that this process would move forward on a bipartisan basis and produce some good, solid recommendations for the full legislature and residents and taxpayers of Illinois to consider. At this point, that has not happened. At this point, for some additional comments, I'd like to turn it over to another fellow representative of ours, Tony McCombie from Savannah, Illinois. Sorry, I almost got that wrong anyways. There you go, Tony, sorry.
That's all right. Good morning. I'm State Representative Tony McCombie from District 71, which encompasses parts of Carroll, Whiteside, Rock Island, and Henry counties. I was not on the task force, but I was asked to be here today because of my experience and knowledge as prior as a city official, as a realtor, an appraiser. What I've learned in my time in Springfield with my assignments on my education committees, and because District 71 is a border district that is property tax heavy. My small rural community, my hometown of Savannah, actually is one of the highest tax rates of all of the communities in my district. Actually has a higher tax rate than Representative Keicher in Sycamore. Actually has a higher tax rate than Representative Demmer in Dixon. However, not you, Joe. Not you, Joe. So it's very important that I have a voice for my district on this subject. This January marks my 4th year in the office, but the message of my constituents, as well as across the state, is the same. No particular order. Lower our taxes, educate our children, and stop political corruption. It's interesting how what we're here today to discuss, the property tax relief, the report, is tied to those 3 things. Lowering our $31.8 billion property tax burden, which is actually $1 billion increase from last year, educating our children by letting our teachers teach, and stopping political corruption, which is certainly tied to taxes. Another a task force in Illinois to address property taxes, one of many that date back to 1975. As stated already, this task force had 88 members. As you're aware, we only have 118 members in the House. It was not equally balanced between Republicans and Democrats. It was ineffective, obviously, and it was bloated with too many members. Like some of our city and county boards, too many members may increase costs, and they add challenge to productive decision-making and actually producing good results. The General Assembly has added 220 mandates since 1992. Mandates that are not funded, mandates that may take away from another program or curriculum, mandates that may increase our property tax rate, mandates that may not add value, mandates that are typically not evidence-based driven and are actually often not even drafted by educators and are political in nature to satisfy special interest groups that just add to the political rhetoric. The largest piece of our property tax bills is our schools, and that bill continuously grows up, even with the last several years of additional funding put into our schools and a new evidence-based funding model. Mandates put on our schools hamstrings our district's budgets, which in turn hurts our teachers' abilities to teach. Teachers are typically the most vocal at the door, at a meeting, at a grocery store, begging for local control of mandates, wanting to know why they have to meet another regulation of something that has no educational impact for children. Press conferences can be like task forces, and you wonder what is the point. But we have to speak out. So many assume they understand the dynamic in Springfield. I had assumptions when I went as well. The processes are not always good. The people don't always have the best intentions, but the voters do have a choice. Property tax reform needs to happen locally as well as on a state level. Look to your townships, your city, your school board, and ask for enhanced transparency. Get involved and know who you're actually putting in office. Our gradual and steady property tax increases are another example that increasing taxes does not promote growth. I hate to state the obvious, but we can't tax our way to prosperity. If that were so, we would not be standing here today. With that, I'd like to introduce Representative Keicher from Sycamore.
Good morning, everybody. I'm State Representative Jeff Keicher. I'm from the 70th District. I represent parts of DeKalb, Boone, and Kane counties. As a member of the Property Tax Relief Task Force, I echo the sentiments from Leader Demmer, Representative McCombie, and Representative Sosnowski, but I'd like to provide some additional perspective. As most of you know, property taxes are a kitchen table issue in the state of Illinois. There's not a family that owns property in the state of Illinois that doesn't have grave concerns, not only about the level currently of our property tax burden, but the acceleration of that burden over time. I was optimistic from the start, maybe it was a little bit of freshman representative optimism, that we're going to sit down, we're going to have diligent and due discussion on the biggest issue that people mention to me time and again as I see them on the streets, at coffee shops and restaurants. Jeff, what are you going to do about property taxes? Well, you know what? We've got this task force, so we're going to dig into the issue. We're going to hopefully come up with some ideas that are going to help resolve what has gotten us into this place. This isn't the first time that the Illinois legislature has attempted to tackle the issue of property taxation. It's sadly just the most recent in a long history of failed task forces that have not moved the ball forward on behalf of the taxpayer. This has perhaps even been the shortest. Each time the past task force has convened to address this most specific and important issue, the Democratic members who have controlled the process have often stifled the discussion and led it towards conclusions or opportunities that they saw best to fulfill their narrative. This goes back to 1975 when lawmakers first approved Senate Joint Resolution 10 and 8 more times since. I'd like to go through the list now with you, if I could. 1982 was the Tax Reform Commission. 1995, the Equity 95 Property Tax Classification Task Force. 1997, the Electric Utility Property Assessment Task Force. 1998, the following year, the Governor's Blue Ribbon Commission on Property Taxation. 2004, the Property Task Force under House Resolution 917. 2008, House Resolution 527, which instructed the House of Representatives Revenue and Finance Committee to conduct an investigation into ways to improve our tax assessment practices in the state of Illinois. 2009, the Property Tax Reform and Relief Task Force. Name sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? In 2018, the TIF Reform Task Force. And finally, in 2019, the Property Tax Relief Task Force now joins this list of squandered opportunities to have diligent and due dialogue on the biggest issue that is being faced at kitchen tables in the state of Illinois. Through all of this, have we seen improvement in property taxes in Illinois? We have not. The people of Illinois deserve better. We need to be better statespeople in handling this crisis. The past few months of this task force were largely shut out of any discussion. If the idea or narrative didn't fit into the paradigm, as Representative Sosnowski had indicated, there was no negotiation on consideration of the issue to truly dialogue and have a give and take discussion about what might be the best path forward to solving the property taxation issue in the state of Illinois. I repeatedly asked for the opportunity to review the draft copy of the report. I learned in the final weeks of the year that it was initially released only to a select few, and they were instructed not to share it forward. This is not the way an 88-person task force should operate. We didn't have due dialogue and discussion. We will, as a caucus, file a package of property tax reform bills, and I do remain optimistic. I'm an optimist at my core, and I'm hopeful that we will be granted fair hearings and that the issues that are relevant to our families across the state of Illinois will not be sidelined to the Rules Committee, that they will be allowed a full discourse in front of the taxpayers. The Democrat response to our bills as they're filed will be very telling on their intentions during the spring session.